All right, so just by way of very quick introduction, my name is Frank DiLorenzo. I'm a client relationship manager for Preferred Strategies, and I've been in the software industry for 36 years, mainly on the ERP side, so implementing systems. Worked directly at Viewpoint for 6 years, had my own company for about 18 years, doing consulting on implementations, and now super excited to be laser focused on the data analytics, business intelligence side of the industry. So that's the Reader's Digest version on me. Ben, why don't you just tell a little bit about yourself, if you would?
Sure. Again, Ben Harrison. I'm have about 22 years in the construction space. I worked for a heavy highway contractor for a number of years, really doing business and business analytics, working with ERP. We converted to Viewpoint, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and just got deeper and deeper into the analytics part of the business. So that's kind of my background and experience.
Thank you, Ben. Okay, so I'll go through the slides quickly because I want Ben to get to the meat, the fun part. But what is our 4-part series about? I would get a lot of questions on what is really the value of Power BI? What do you mean by data analytics? What's a data-driven journey mean? And it's changing so quickly that we thought for our Viewpoint, Vista partners and clients, we could start doing just a little bit of basic education. So the first one, which is recorded, and at the end of this, I'll send out a slide deck that has a link to that recording for your convenience if you want to view it. But Power BI, why? It was a brief introduction, and Ben took us through the Power BI desktop, and how you connect that to Vista data. Today, we're going to expand upon Vista using the Power BI platform. What does it mean to publish to the Power BI service? How does that end up in a mobile environment for your use? And then part 3 will be a data model approach. Viewpoint is an excellent transactional database. What does it mean to really transform that into an excellent reporting model and maybe bring in other data sources? And then our 4th and final part in this series, we'll talk about some of the really cool stuff, the paradigm shift. How can you use AI, Microsoft Insights, predictive analytics? What's coming over the horizon in the near term? So I won't read this to you because I know you can read it, but I'll leave it up for a moment. This is just some really good food for thought. How quickly the nature and pace of data is changing and the volume available, and how these new platforms can empower us to actually use that data. What's real interesting to me is that you'll see some of these quotes I have. Things have changed so quickly, but really, when I implemented Timberline before and Viewpoint, how we looked at data in the early 2000s is really, for most companies, how we still look at it today, yet it's changed so much. So here's some interesting quotes that back that up. From Gary King at Harvard: big data is not about the data. From Daniel Keyes Moran, a computer programmer and science fiction author: you can have data, this one's pretty good, I think, data without information, but you cannot have information without data. Just makes sense. This next one I highlighted because I just thought this was fascinating. There were 5 exabytes. Ben, I don't even know what an exabyte is, but it's pretty big, I assume, yes?
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's a
It's
lot.
more than you can count.
Okay. Of information created between the dawn of civilization through 2003. But that much is created every 2 days since then. That's from Eric Schmidt of Google, and that was 2010. So a decade ago. I'm sure it's only picked up the pace. So the highlights of what we covered on part 1, this is the link I'll send to you. Talked about the desktop application, which is free to download. What is it like to create reports directly against the Vista data? What are some of the things you need to think about, and formulas you need to create, and joins and links and keys that you need to kind of manually build? And what does that look like? How's it responsive? Do you hit the production server, or is it in the cloud? So, we talked about that a bit, and it's on that recording. Improved report writing with an optimized data model. We touched on that. And now we're going to go on to part 2, which is the Power BI service. What does it mean? We talk about workspaces, apps, dashboards, reports, and data sets. We're going to define that. Gateways. Where is the data? In Viewpoint, as you know, you could be in the Viewpoint cloud, moving already in Azure, on-prem. And then, let's add another dimension to the mix. What if you want to bring in project management data, estimating data, CRM, other systems, and they're in separate clouds or part on-prem or in a cloud? Where is all this data? How do you get to it? And then we're going to have a little fun look at the mobile component. and then questions, and up next will be part 3. So by way of who we are, Preferred Strategies is completely focused on data analytics and helping companies go. We want to be an extension, basically, of your business intelligence expertise, or be that arm for you and help you on that data transformation journey. So we have 20 really good people that have been doing this, some of the company for just over 18 years. By way of who you're meeting with today, that's me down here in the corner. And no, I'm not kneeling. I'm one of the less tall folks on the team, but that's okay. And then our product director, Ben Harrison, um, right up here. So that's who's taking you through this today. And like I said, our focus is really 2 systems, JD Edwards and Viewpoint, business intelligence. That is our expertise. So we talked about the desktop on part 1. Ben's going to take us through the service and how that translates into a mobile environment. So I show this because I think it visually explains what's happening in ERP and Viewpoint. You get so much data, valuable data. If I could pour it on the table, it's more data than I could ever get my arms around. So how do I effectively use that data and make it actionable information? Well, analytics is the key, and I think we have some good news. So Ben, I'm going to stop there and hand it over to you to take us through some Power BI best practices and so forth.
Okay, good. So I should be able to hopefully showing my screen now, and that's the wrong screen. That's the my granddaughter playing with Play-Doh. So let me switch screens.
She looks like she's building an early data model, I think. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's it. You know, this webinar always gets me, GoToWebinar always drives me crazy because I always pick the wrong screen.
It's okay, you'll get it.
I will. I got it right here. Screen 2, great. Sorry for that delay. Though you did like my cute granddaughter. Great, so just to kind of emphasize what Frank's been talking about, Power BI, when we say Power BI, there's a lot to it, right? So we've talked about the data, Power BI desktop, that's what we're looking at here. Last week, we made a quick report using Contract Master and cost details. Frank then also made the same report using a data model, but the reporting tool is the same, Power BI desktop, but the system, the Power BI service, the desktop, and the Power BI apps on mobile all work together. They're meant to work together. So today we're going to talk about, after I've got some report built that I like, that I want to share, how do I share that? So a Power BI report really is just a file. It's a PBIX file. It's very similar to a document file that Word would create, a docx, or an Excel file, an XLSX file. It's just a file, and it's got information in it that helps you understand how you want to read that data. But again, it's very portable. I can create a PBIX file. I can email it to Frank. If Frank can open it, he can actually use that as long as he has access to the same data sources that I wrote the report on. If he can read the contract master or the cost details, he could do that. That's, though, not very effective at sharing, right? If I'm just emailing files around, that does work. But if you're thinking about enterprise-wide or controlling access, you really need to have a place to publish. And that's what the Power BI service does. So to publish this report, if I wanted to start sharing it with people, I'm going to come up with this little share button, say publish, and I'm going to say, do I want to, save? I've made some changes, but it's going to ask me, where do I want to put that data? And it's out of the Power BI service. Now, anybody who's got a domain can have an account on the Power BI service. By default, you're going to just have my workspace. So that's a workspace dedicated to Ben Harrison at preferredstrategies.com. And I can use that workspace. I can publish reports to that workspace. I can test reports in that workspace, but I cannot share reports in that workspace. I have to create a different workspace that I might build, maybe an accounts payable workspace or something like that. We'll talk about workspaces a bit more in a little bit. But that's where Microsoft's going to start making money. The report writer is free, the workspace is free, but if I want to publish data to publish reports to a workspace that I'm going to share or collaborate in, Microsoft's going to want a different license fee. And there's all sorts of levels of licenses. The most common one is Power BI Pro, and I think they charge $9.95 a month, $9.95 a month per user to access those shared reports. But it's as easy as that. I pick a workspace and I publish it, and then this report would be pushed out into the service. So let's go ahead and hop over to the service and look and see what that looks like. Okay, so now I've pulled up the Power BI service. This is where I've published reports to. Just a quick kind of navigation. If you pretty Microsoft is generic. You got a navigation pane over on the left-hand side. Up at the top, I've got a banner. And nice thing is this banner you can customize for your company. So maybe you want to have it, be branded a little bit. That's kind of convenient. This is our branding for Preferred Strategies. You notice we've got the logo up in the corner. So that's kind of nice. In the middle of the page is maybe some most recent content that I've done, some favorites and some recent data. That's kind of useful because sometimes you end up with a lot of navigation details here and you're just going back to the same report over and over again. So you can see the reports that I've been going to lately. And the last little bit up here is some control, not navigation, but some settings that are up here. And we'll look at a few of the settings for this service. You'll notice that I am logged in here already as B. Harrison at preferredstrategies.com. So these are domain specific accounts, right? So your company has a domain that be used for that. When people log in, they're validating against their Active Directory domain. So that's important to think about when we talk later on about access, security, who can see what workspaces. You're always validating against your Active Directory, so not against your Vista account, unless you happen to sync your Vista account with your Active Directory, which is actually a best practice. I'd recommend if you can do that, it's going to make your lives easier going forward as you use more and more Vista data in a Power BI service. So I've logged in. I've got a bunch of different reports. What I want to start with is looking at maybe the workspace that is appropriate. So I've got opened here the Viewpoint workspace, and it's got a lot of neat reports in it, a lot of data. There's a lot more workspaces in here that we could look at. I think I showed you there's an accounts payable workspace, project manager workspace, and those are things that you're going to want to think about as you create them, because there's a lot of capability that you want to control, and you really control at the workspace data set level. So in this workspace, I'm going to go ahead and shrink up. I've got dashboards, reports, workbooks, data sets, and data flows. Those are the major elements that sit in a workspace. So let's talk a little bit about that. When I published a report on the desktop, I automatically created a data set for that report and the report for that report. That would be underneath data set. So if I'd had a data set report called job cost or BIN's job cost report, it would show up in here, and I'd have a data set here. You see job cost data set and job cost report. They go together. They are published at the same time. So what is that? How do we think about data sets and reports and how they relate? Let me go ahead and change the view of this. This is just a list view of everything that's in the Viewpoint workspace. But I'm going to come up here and say, let's look at, instead of the list view, the lineage view, because this will help us kind of conceive of what is happening in this workspace. So I'm going to start on the right and work my way left to do this. But you can see that I got dashboards, and we'll talk about how dashboards get created. But a dashboard really is just a summary of elements from reports. So the report is what I created in the Power BI desktop, right? I might have the job cost report, and the job cost report looks at a data set. So again, every time I publish a report, I publish a data set, unless the case happens to be that I created the report on the data set. And that's a big lesson learned also that I'd recommend you do. You're going to want to create as few data sets as you need. So you want to reuse data sets, and reusing them is actually really easy. So I'm going to hop back right away into the Power BI desktop tool. And I just want to show you that when I was creating reports and I said get data, I had choices of where that data came from, whether it's an Excel data set, a SQL Server data set, analysis services, or a Power BI data set. So I can actually build a report off of, instead of going to SQL Server, I can build a report on a data set that already exists. And that's kind of the secret ways that you make fewer data sets and make your management life easier when you're talking about reports out in the Power BI service. So I'm hopping back to the service now. So you can see that I've got 2 reports here looking at one single data set. So that's going to be a best practice. And actually, hopefully you end up with maybe 10 reports looking at a single data set instead of a report and a data set matching one-to-one. Before that, in this area now, is where data is coming from. And so think about, I've got a data set that's been published and it has a source. In this case, I took it off a SQL Server. It goes through a gateway. So a gateway is a really important concept in Power BI service. When I publish a report, I may want to be able to refresh it. I may want to refresh it manually so I don't have to keep on republishing the report. And you can do that by creating a gateway. So you're going to want to do that as going forward, and you're going to want to understand where that gateway gets its data from. And there's a bunch of choices. We really like analysis services, and when we get together for our webinar 3, we're going to talk about why building a data set using analysis services would serve you well. There's a lot of benefits to that, but it has to do with the data model, creating the data model, making your data governance good, adding the security level to it. But analysis services becomes a very good kind of source for data. It's probably worth, and maybe this is getting pretty deep, but I think it's worth understanding that when you create a Power BI report, you're actually creating an analysis services database. You don't need to know that. You don't get to choose that, but Power BI actually runs on analysis services. So the technology behind it is this analysis services. Now, there's a particular type of model in there called tabular, and that's what's happening. It's a technology that came out of Excel Power Pivot 2010, and that's what really Power BI has been developed on, and kind of how it's blossomed into what it is now today. So we'll talk about that at length next week, but just keep in mind that I've created a data set, I have got a gateway, I can refresh that data set, I can schedule that data set to be refreshed so that it always has current information. And there's rules about that depending on the licenses that you've built. So what would be our recommendation? We'd recommend you create as few data sets as possible, make many reports based upon a single data set, and then create a refresh schedule that serves your readers or your users so that they get the data when they need it and how they need it. So there's one other thing I mentioned last week that I said I'd revisit this week, and that's back when you're saying, when we first said get data back in the desktop. So if you can rewatch the webinar if you did, but we said get data, and there's a choice in there saying, do you want to import the data or do you want to use live query? So that's an important decision, and there's complicated nuances to that. So let me again pop back to the service and talk about that. This data can be sitting right here. It can be a full data set that I'd imported. And so that when this report is running, it's looking at that data set. If I'd created this data set as a live query, when this report runs, it's going to pass through the data set and do a live query on your Vista data. There's a benefit to that, and that it's always live data. There's a cost to that, and that these queries now are hitting your Vista system. It actually is, the performance is quite slow. I think that I've never been satisfied with the live query performance. So again, our best practice that we recommend is that you do an import, and then the data sitting here, or at least it's in the analysis services, depending on your original source, and you're not hitting that live query. You'll get better performance. Your end users will be happier. When they right click and drill down, they're going to get the responses much faster. So import probably is superior in almost every way except one, and that is depending on your license level in Power BI, you have data size limitations. Now, my experience is that those limitations, you have to have a lot of data before it's a problem. But because this is calculating and happening out in Microsoft's cloud, there is a limit to how big that data set can get. I hit that limit occasionally, but not often. So we'd want to talk with you in depth about if you have a data set size problem, what are your options to solve that? And there are a number of options that get quite technical. So we've talked about data sets and reports. We've talked about the gateway that gets to them, but we had other elements in here that are worth looking at. So one of the things was workbooks, right? I'd mentioned that you can have workbooks in an area, and workbooks really are just a way to maybe look at Excel through a live online option. So it might just be some simple sample data. In this case, I made a dummy little set of regions and categories. It can be something a little more sophisticated. And I deleted that workbook earlier, so apologize for doing that. But that would be really a workbook in this context is saying, I would like to use Excel online. Doesn't do you much more than you're getting your normal Excel online or using Excel and SharePoint. There is, though, some strength in using Excel on your desktop to connect straight to a data set. So you can go from Excel to a data set, or from Power BI to a data set, or to any number of other reporting tools to a data set. So data sets are really useful in that way because they can feed lots of things. The other element that I'm not going to highlight today, but that's data flows. Data flows are something that you'd want to look into if your company really wants to start looking at data that's coming from somewhere else besides Vista. So I've created in the past data flows that bring in weather data for jobs. You could bring in maybe the oil price futures, interest rates, but if you wanted to say, I want to start planning to create reports that take Vista data and merge it with some other data source that's either in Google Analytics or just any free available data source, you can create data flows that merge that data with your Vista data so you can see that information side by side. Very powerful, very interesting. The last element that we're going to look at here is back to, I need to get back to my Viewpoint workspace. I switched to my workspace. You notice I have almost nothing there. Is dashboards. And I'm going to go ahead and look at the job cost dashboard for the time being. And the dashboards are really just an assembly of elements from a report, right? So in a report, I made a job cost report. I had cost in excess. And in that, I pinned a visual to a dashboard. But so a dashboard is meant to be a collection of visuals from multiple reports. I like to think that maybe an executive dashboard is saying I've got information about AP in one visual, and AR in another visual, and job cost in a third visual, and maybe a fourth visual might be safety. These dashboards, though, are really flexible. I can change them around. Frank's going to show you in a little bit this particular dashboard on his mobile device and how you can configure it to look differently in a mobile situation. But again, a dashboard is meant to be a collection of parts of job reports. The nature of it is that if I click on an element in a dashboard, it's going to open the report that it came from. So again, one of the things we like to talk about is a tool like Power BI is going to change how you think about consuming data. And the idea that your dashboards can take you straight to a report, the report can you drill straight down to the billing details or the cost details or the AP details. You're kind of linking things together in a way that makes that inquiry process much more interactive for your end users. So that's the dashboards part of this process. Really easy to make one. If I'm in a report and I wanted to add something to a dashboard, it's really as easy as coming over here, clicking this little pin button and saying, I'd like to pin this visual to a dashboard. I can pin it to an existing dashboard or to a brand new dashboard, and it's that simple. You can actually pin entire reports to the dashboard if you choose to. I do that up here into more options, and so you can actually have a dashboard that is just a report. They could be the one and the same thing. But dashboards, again, are going to be helpful. Yes, Frank?
Sorry. Could you do me one quick favor while we're here? And I know I'm giving away a tiny bit of the next part 3, but if you could click edit just for 1 second.
Sure.
I just want to show one particular thing. I think it's worthy of mention here. So edit.
Okay.
And our measures on the right, all I want to illustrate is a lot of what Ben is showing. I, as more of a business consumer, I am not a technical report writer. I've done some Crystal, but I'm not creating formulas and joins and everything. But because of the measures pre-built in a best practices data model, and Ben, can you expand that, or is that you're not
No,
getting
Microsoft had done
that?
something, and they've given me. I've lost my little tool tip that
Okay,
to drag that
no
open.
worries. If you
But
could scroll down just a little. So all I wanted to impress upon everybody here today is because the calendaring is done, because all these measures under actual and some of the other fields in there are, yeah, productivity, estimates, over, under. That's
sorry,
okay. I mean,
I'm clicked that, Frank. Sorry about that.
that's all right. Just leave it right there if you would. So
Okay.
all the data available in this model in these fields is what makes ad hoc reporting, the ability to create my own dashboards, and have confidence that the data I'm pulling is one version of the truth because of how the data model's built on top and extracting, from Vista. This is what makes it real powerful. We'll focus on that next week. So Ben, I did not mean to take you off the path, but I just wanted to make that quick point.
And that's a good point. So obviously, Frank, you and I are looking at this data model. This is what we use to make our reports because we've got that. Again, someone who's just getting started with Vista is going to have more of this look and that field back at the report level, where you have maybe just two field names, right? So your point, I think, is worth mentioning. This is valid. You can be looking at Vista data right away. You don't need something else to start looking at your Vista data, but you need to understand how these relationships are built. Back to what we'll talk about in depth next week is we really feel strongly that building a data model gives you a lot of benefit, and that we'll see that benefit largely in our fourth webinar, where we start talking about the artificial intelligence and the depth of this model. What does it bring you when you're looking for insights across your data? So there's a lot of reason to be thinking about that. I thought you were going to have me look at the mobile layout here, Frank. But since we're editing it, that's another thing that we can emphasize. Again, the service, the Power BI service, is one way to look at a report. You can also look at this exact same report on your phone or on your tablet, and you have the ability now to configure every report so that it suits either way, right? So we did a little bit about this in our demo last week, but essentially you'd just be dragging elements into a phone view and then deciding how you want that to look. It's not a different report. It's not a different version of the report. It's the same report, just taught to display distinctly differently when you're looking at it from a mobile point of view. So we've talked about workspaces, and that's been important. That's been useful to us. You're going to want to understand how workspaces work. Workspaces are the fundamental element where you're beginning to share. But what we've got here, if I go back to my Viewpoint workspace, and I need to want to show you what one of those options are, is the internet is very slow today, so I apologize for that. I don't want to save those changes. So notice that I've got a workspace, and you maybe didn't notice up here, but there's an app location here. So every workspace has what Microsoft calls an app. And what you're going to do is you're going to give people permission to get into workspaces and to do editing in those workspaces, or to add a report, or to change a report. But you're going to have a lot of people you want to consume that report that you don't want rights to change the report. And again, a workspace is largely about collaborating, this changing. So let me go back to the list view, and what we're going to see here is that there's a way to create an app or update an app, and what happens is the app is where consumers come in. So if I can have permission to the app workspace, and I can see things in the app, let's say the Viewpoint app workspace, and these are the reports that I can see in the app. You can have different people have permissions to the app, then have permissions to the workspace, and that actually leads to the next idea about security. There's probably 4 levels of security that are going to be helpful, which really comes back to how do I tie Active Directory back to that? but you can have data security at the data set. You can have data security at the workspace. You can also have security at the app workspace, right? So I've said that Frank and I can see these reports in the app. These are the workspaces. This is the app that's tied to the Viewpoint workspace. And so you might then have, again, a workspace for AP, and then you have an app for AP. You might have a workspace for project managers, and you would have an app for project managers. So again, every workspace has an app, and apps are where consumers come and see the reports. Workspaces are where collaborators develop reports. Hopefully that kind of makes sense, or I've not beat a dead horse too long on that. But again,
Hey, Ben,
yes,
we did get a good question that ties to that, so I'm going to go ahead and read it really quickly. Can these dashboards easily be filtered based on security? For the specific example, a department manager could be set up just to see the information for his or her department.
Yes, that you can, and that's a really good question. Thanks for asking it. And so the way you do that is different when we talk about our data sets next week, but the concept's the same. So I've just gone back to the desktop tool, and in the desktop tool, when I look at modeling, there's a chance here to start creating roles, right? So I may create a role that is credit manager, and another role that is finance manager, and another role that is, some department that you might be able to do. And these roles really are, you're going to use a DAX filter. DAX is the data analytics expression. That's what that means. That creates a true or false. So essentially, that's where you're going to say, maybe reading the Vista security tables, you're going to just say, let these people see these rows in this data set. Let somebody else see other rows in the data set. So once you've created roles in the report and you then publish that report, you can then control through Active Directory who belongs to which roles. So again, that's a long way to answer that. Yes, you can build that row level security so that somebody coming into the service will see only the rows of data that they should see. Frank, you think that answered the question? Was that?
Yeah, I think so. And if not, we can always circle back.
Yeah, okay. So we've talked now through, I want to make sure I didn't miss anything in my notes. We talked about live query, we talked about workbooks, dashboards, apps, and workspaces and how they're tied together. I've covered a little bit on security about how you can add it at the data set level with roles. You can add it to the workspace or the app. Who gets to these places and who can see which reports is very controllable. That's really kind of the summary of the Power BI service. In the 2 webinars, our 4th webinar is going to really look at dashboards at length and talk about the artificial intelligence capabilities built into Power BI, right? Where you can have it search for relationships you can't see. We're going to talk about comments and subscribing and alerts and some of the forecasting things that are built into a modern BI tool. And, so that would be, I think, really helpful in 2 weeks. So we're not nearly done with the service, but the basic element of last week, we talked about how do you create a report against Vista data. Now we talked about in the service, how do you publish that data so that people can share it and see it. We talked a little bit how you control through security in this published world so that you limit to, who has rights to see either data rows or entire reports. And we'll really expand on that next week when we talk about kind of the data model and what you can do with that and how you manage your kind of reporting world differently. So Frank, what that leaves us with is kind of looking at the mobile side of this. And I think you'd had your mobile device ready to show?
I do. I'm going to make this quick, respectful to everybody's time, but I'm trying to share the screen again, and there's a bit of a lag. So there we go. It should be coming up in 3, 2, 1. Can you see it?
Yep, got it.
Okay. So here's the dashboards that Ben was talking about. I created a couple of these reports myself and then pinned them to one dashboard because that's how I wanted to see them. Just really quickly, here's where I can build what I want my mobile view to appear like. So if I wanted to replace this particular visual with this one here, I can do that. I can move them around. I can have filters. I can make this even more interactive with filters, uh, period, fiscal year options to slice and dice. But let's say I'm happy with that as it is now. When I look at that on my mobile phone, let's pull that up. So hopefully you can see my phone. I'll try and make it bigger. There we go. So here you see the app, Power BI. Now I can open the app. I can open the app and I can go through my reports here and click and open and interact with them. I could also comment with folks on my team and collaborate on those reports, or subscribe and have them sent to me automatically based on data conditions. But the other thing you can do, and I kind of like to reiterate this, it was fun for me. 4 days into my position of preferred strategies, I wrote one of these and easily connected it to my Siri. So if I say, for example, please open job cost dashboard. I like to be polite even with technology. You don't know when we might be working for it someday. So here's my dashboards on my phone, and it's responsive. So if I turn my phone sideways, I'm going to get the landscape view. If I want to expand on a visual, like my geographic location, I can do that. Of course, I can zoom in on a particular area. And then there's a lot of things you can do, like hover over one of these dots and have a tooltip pop up. I've got some other options here to comment on this if I wanted to. So there's one of the old comments I had. I could draw on this and annotate notes if I'd like. So quite a bit you can do. It really allows you to be productive on a mobile device, which, let's face it, many of us are. I mean, between Teams and Word and my email, Google, I use my phone probably as much as my laptop these days. So that was a real quick just view. And if there's any questions, please do pop them in the question panel and we will address them. The very last slide I want to show, and then I have two questions that we will quickly get to. This is kind of talking about a sneak peek at next week, which is Tuesday, May 26th at 11. You can register on our site. I notice many people have, but this is a key point to me. Here's your Viewpoint solution and maybe other data sources, but Viewpoint. And then maybe I've written 10, 20, 30 crystal reports, Excel spreadsheets, SSRS reports. Well, if I have to change something like how I'm calculating earned revenue to date or projected cost to completion, and I have that embedded in several reports, I'm going to each report to make the fix. Ben, you did that in your old position, right? If I
I do
remember.
that all the time. Yep.
So if we have a good data governance and model, you update the measure one time and it propagates to all the places that call on it for reporting. So we'll touch on that more, but I thought that was something just to share with you today and give you some food for thought on that. So hope to see everybody May 26th. Last two questions I see, Ben. Will this work with Viewpoint Vista user-defined fields?
Yes, it will. Thanks for asking. That's an important thing. So what we're doing when you know, if you're going direct, so let's say originally I'd connected to the contract master in my sample from last week. That's my contract master. So any user-defined fields I put on the contract master would be available to me for reporting. If I was like a job master, same thing. So again, we're building on your base tables. If we're thinking about our data model that we're talking about more in depth next week, we're doing the exact same thing. So your user-defined fields would come in. If you had a user-defined table that you'd created, that also can come in. Again, the idea that in the end, what we believe, most customers don't need only Vista. They need Vista data, but they need Vista data and something else, your field time capture data or your service management data from a service field tablet, or just any data. So our belief is that the foundation is to get your Vista data into a tool like Power BI, so you can start getting the power of slicing and dicing, but that foundation needs to make room for all this other data set, and that would include the user-defined fields. So
Thank you.
sorry, that was
Yeah,
such a
that's
long answer.
No, that's perfect, Ben. But some of those data sets, in a recurring theme we hear about bid to win, B2W, HCSS, Procore, Red Team, Essential, Key Styles, About Time. These are just a few on our list, and we've done some. But the point is, we do this all the time in helping folks get those data sets or that data into the reporting model. So we'll talk more about that. Last question I'm going to ask, and I'm going to let everybody conclude, Ben. And I want to thank everybody again for their time. I'll probably say that yet again. Does it matter if Vista is in the Viewpoint cloud, on-prem, Azure? Does that affect the ability to do some of these things?
No, it does not. That's the real simple short answer. We did talk about the data set and the deployment options and whether or not one of the things we'll talk about next week is utilizing the power of SSAS tabular more extensively. But the location in the end does not matter. We're going to grab that data because of the power of the gateway. You can really get that data into Power BI and filter that data through Power BI from any place, anywhere. It doesn't. There's no real restrictions there.
Ben, one last question that popped in that everybody might care to hear. Do I need Power BI Premium?
Probably not. I think that again, that depends on the company. Power BI Pro is $9.95 per user per month. So if you're going to have 10 or 20 users, that's probably going to be your most expensive way. Power BI Premium gets probably cost effective. I think around 500 users. We'd have to, again, it's all sorts of give and take there. The other thing that Power BI Premium would do, and we're talking about the math of when does it pay, is you could deploy the tabular models into Premium directly. That's one of the things that Microsoft does. But those are long conversations. Most companies do not need Power BI Premium. They're going to be happy with Power BI Pro.
Very good. Well, that's all the questions we have. I promised we'd keep it between 30 and 45 minutes. We're at 44, so I want to sincerely thank everybody for their time. And as always, I'm going to send out this PDF slide to everybody here today. It'll have a link to the recording and a subsequent link to this recording. And if there's anything we can do to help, this is all we do. Please reach out to us. We're happy to talk one-on-one. And thank you again, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. See you in 2 weeks.
Take care. Bye now.